They thought if you looked closely, the mountain represented the wisdom and even the face of an elder. The Indians called it the Grandfather Mountain. In 1540, Hernando de Soto and his band of 600 soldier explorers cut their own path through these mountains, searching for gold. Only Indian trading paths interrupted the Appalachian wilderness until 1753, 200 years later. It was then that the Moravians moved from Pennsylvania to North Carolina. The farther they traveled, the worse it got. Often they had to cut trees and chop with grubbing hoes to clear passages for their wagons. Block and tackle kept them from slipping over mountain edges. It took them 3 weeks to move from where Stanton, Virginia, and Winston-Salem, North Carolina are today, a distance of only 200 miles. Within 30 years, the Yellow Mountain Road and Boone's Trace were built. Then came private turnpikes. But in reality, for 200 more years, North Carolina and Virginia did little to create mountain roads. In 1909, a visionary state official named Colonel Joseph Pratt began a road he called the Crest of the Blue Ridge Highway. He actually planned and surveyed the summit route along the southern Appalachians, when the motor car was still a new invention. Those who follow him stayed faithful to his image of a pure recreational road that would open the spectacular beauty along the crest of the Blue Ridge Mountains to the people of America. A 100 men began work in the summer of 1912 with Colonel Pratt. 3 generations later, what we know as the Blue Ridge Parkway emerged. If 73 years sounds like forever, consider the Inter-American Highway from the United States to Chile. That one took 500 years to complete. The modern parkway of today really got moving in the early 1930s. The Blue Ridge Parkway would connect the beautiful Shenandoah National Park with the breathtaking vistas of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Only the brief trip around Grandfather Mountain was incomplete by 1970. But what a gap that was. How do you build a perfect setting for a jewel like Grandfather Mountain? One of the highest pinnacles in eastern America, it deserved the finest in design and engineering for the special section of parkway which would span it. The challenge seemed impossible. To bridge the last remaining gap in the Blue Ridge Parkway meant extending the road across huge boulders, precariously balanced on the rugged mountains of North Carolina. It meant following the difficult contour of the south side of Grandfather Mountain. It meant building at an elevation of 4,400 feet. It meant snaking the viaduct into less than a quarter mile. And most importantly, it meant that quarter of a mile had to stand away, had to stand off the face of the mountain itself. This viaduct would be a bridge, the final link in the Blue Ridge Parkway. It would enable travelers to motor completely around the mountain, as if they were flying high above the bold streams, the wildlife, the unspoiled wilderness called the Linn Cove, a Scottish term for steep ravine, precipice, or waterfall. Well, the federal government bit the bullet. The 469 miles of the Blue Ridge Parkway had been separated too long. Those under construction signs were getting too old. Visitors were tired of the aging detour. This bridge was never an ordinary construction project. It was unique because it had to follow the shape, the contours of old Grandfather Mountain, and it had to tilt for safety. So no two bridge sections could be alike. Each section had to be created like a separate sculpture. The viaduct had to be earthquake resistant, so it was stabilized around concrete pillars, preventing lateral movement. And to protect the land, the Linn Cove Viaduct was incredibly built from the top down. The bridge was designed with the help of computers. Its construction method was new in the United States. The whole idea was to build this constantly curving, constantly changing bridge in small hollow sections, fitting one against the other. Then all the sections would be tightly held together with steel cables laced inside, sort of like lacing up a pair of boots. The whole thing was only going to be a quarter-mile long, but it was going to cost $10 million and be worth every bit of it. This innovative bridge was going to have to be built under mighty difficult conditions. The designers and builders considered the environment with every tree and creek they spanned, and with every boulder they encountered. The ground was touched as little as possible in order to protect the fragile, pristine terrain. Only the trees that took up the same space as the bridge were cut. Boulders were protected to keep concrete or any other material from staining them. Not one trout in Wilson Creek was to suffer. Not one tree, not one boulder could be unnecessarily displaced. And the weather. That was a special challenge because the work crews were forced to contend with fog, with 90 inches of rain each year, and with a wind that could reach 140 miles an hour. And each winter brought intense cold with up to 20 or 30 days of snow. The weather could change from sun to fog to rain in 20 minutes, and sometimes several times a day. The spot seemed to be its own weather factory. The builders set up a building a mile away to cast the hollow sections. Casting these sections alone took 2 years. As small and hollow as those segments were, each still weighed about 50 tons. The builders worked to color the concrete to match the boulders on Grandfather Mountain, for this bridge was to look as if it really belonged there. Each section was cast right up against the last one to make sure they would all fit when brought together on the side of the mountain. To hold all this up, piers had to be cast. The tallest was almost 70 feet. Temporary wooden bridges were built to get the workers to the pier sites and still protect the mountainside. Fences were used to keep from contaminating nearby streams. Getting those 7 piers on firm footing was one devilish task. For when the builders went looking for bedrock on which to rest those piers, they sometimes had to probe more than 100 feet. They squirted carloads of liquid concrete into unstable rock in order to make it stable. They started building this one-of-a-kind bridge from the south end because the north end wasn't even accessible. To do it right, temporary piers were built to hold up the roadway until it reached the permanent ones. Each of the sections was trucked to the end of the growing road and lowered with a crane into position. They glued the sections together with epoxy. By the time each section was attached and laced up, it was strong enough to hang free, extending into open space. This process went on for 5 years before all 153 sections extended the Blue Ridge Parkway through the most difficult part of its trip down the spine of eastern America. Can you imagine what would have happened if even one of the segments didn't fit? And if the bridge didn't end up exactly on the spot where it was supposed to end? To make sure, alignment was checked all the time so that less than 1/32 of an inch of tolerance was permitted. The builder's care and precision meant a minimum of problems throughout the project. In order to keep construction moving along during the winters, a special wood frame was built to cover and insulate each joint. Portable heaters kept the glue joints warm. As each cold, windy winter and foggy, rainy spring and hot, sunny summer and glorious orange autumn passed, this award-winning design drew closer to reality. Only miscellaneous details remained. They dressed up the bridge with hard granite curbing. They built sturdy open railings that protect travelers and give them the finest visibility without their having to stop and get out of the car. And what a view. In every season, through ever-changing weather, that spectacle has to be one of the most exciting on the face of the earth. It represents a work of art, a work of man, a work of nature. The Linn Cove Viaduct frames the picturesque Blue Ridge in a technological wonder that weaves its structure under, over, around, and through the mountains without so much as a whisper. The Blue Ridge Parkway is something to experience. Perched high on the crest of the Appalachian Mountains and overlooking their fellow peaks, the Parkway is a monument to road-building ingenuity and a focus of world attention. It is a present of the National Park Service to the people who enjoy the simplicity and the grandeur of these United States.